a second paradigm shift that I also want to talk about and make sure that we're clear about. We have a way of thinking that if we just evangelize someone, we get them across the line, this invisible line to Jesus, and then we disciple them. And it's almost like this process of do this, then that, and then that. And discipling them is at the end of that process because you get them to a point where you can disciple them. But what I want to point out, and this is the paradigm shift, is that Jesus didn't separate evangelism from discipleship. It was actually a natural overflow of his life among people every day. And so this step-by-step thing is really not biblical. It's sort of something that's crept into evangelism. In seminary and church circles, we've emphasized evangelism as a separate activity, I think primarily because our church in North America has lived in this assumption that people already know, so all we have to do is invite them across the line, and then, hey, we're home free. But as we've talked about, people really don't know. They really don't know Jesus. They really don't know the scriptures. They really don't have an experience of the church even. So what I want to show you is sort of a diagram of what I'm talking about, and this leads to some evangelism that's not the best practice that we could do in following the way that Christ does it. So we almost look at it as a step-by-step process, and discipling begins after someone actually discovers that Jesus is real. But that kind of model leads us to a kind of evangelism where we interrupt people's life rather than working with their life. And it means that you almost have to have this episodic kind of approach. And what we're advocating is an approach that is not like where you're grabbing and shaking them to get their attention, but you're actually just working with them. So here's the way that I believe that Jesus thinks about disciple making, that it's everything together, and it's an integrated part of life. So it's how I, with Jesus and my missional family, continually invite people closer to Jesus as an intentional, integrated life activity. That's a lot of words, but basically it's saying, as we say, Derek, it's, where people live, work, play, learn, that wherever you are is a place where you're discipling people. You disciple people before they even know Christ. And here's the key principle behind that, which is a good Wesleyan principle, by the way, that God progressively reveals his acts and has interactions with people that over time draw them closer to him and to be more like him. So it's instead of being a episodic event, it's actually an event that Jesus is constantly engaged in, and he's constantly inviting us to engage with him in that.
So here's the thing. We've often thought of evangelism as being separate from discipleship, and that has harmed the evangelism that we need to do now. Jesus always saw it as one piece of the same fabric. And here's the reason it makes a difference, is because people are now generations away from having an experience with the church and having any kind of really clue about who Jesus is or who Christians are. And so there are multiple steps now that need to be taken before they can actually answer the question, are you ready to follow Jesus and change your life? They need time, and they need to have that soaking and multiple questions answered, a reorientation to life. And so that actually takes multiple steps. On the Engel scale of evangelism, we see now that our population has moved to what we call a -10 steps away from faith. whereas most of our evangelism models in the episodic style are built for one step. And what we need to do is to put it back in the context of Jesus and his discipleship that was continuous. He didn't separate evangelism from discipleship because he believed that you could actually disciple people before they actually believed that he was the way and the truth and the life. So how can we approach it that way?
Thoughts? So one difference is that instead of evangelism being a program, it's actually a part of our natural everyday life. I'm going to move forward.
What was that?
So,
I feel like it also, Sandy, could I say something?
Yeah.
So I feel like it also is, it releases us from the kind of ABC approach to, I'm thinking like the sales term, like always be, closing, always be converting.
Yeah.
To where you don't, it really takes that pressure off of feeling like, the used car salesman. It's like, so what's it going to take for you to get into heaven today?
Right.
What do I got to do to sweeten this deal for you? What's the other apologetic I got to throw at you that'll destroy your argument and make you crumple into the kingdom, right? And so I really and rather than really recognizing that there is a direction, and that I even imagine there being kind of this merging of pathways where it's intentional, but it's also if God is the one who's progressively revealing himself, we're joining into that process. We're actually being used by him to reveal himself to others, So
right.
The other thing that I guess I would catch from our experience, especially with people in marinas and people kind of on the edge, is if you looked at a continuum of minus 20 to 20, and 0 is kind of where they cross the line to we may encounter people in that minus 10, minus 15, and move into minus 8, minus 5, and we're not getting them across the line, but we're being obedient to God, being where we're at, and we're just part of the part of God's plan.
Right.
We need to be free, feel free to not feel failure that we didn't cross the line, but we're being obedient and moving people towards Jesus.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah. So this whole idea of that God is progressively revealing his acts and through interactions with people and all is why we basically find that the learning circle really works with us personally as disciples. I know Teresa's not familiar with this, and Teresa, I might have to later on go through this a little bit more in depth with you. But we see this as a continuous circle that we're on rather than as a linear process. So it's not only step by step, that it's not step by step, but it's that isn't there some part of us that's constantly being evangelized? I find in my life that there's times when I have to come back to Jesus, or I learn something new that I was doing wrong, and I move from death to life. And I have this huge step towards Jesus that it's not like I finished and I completed the race and now I'm perfect. I'm just moving towards perfection, right, Teresa?
Yeah, I see it in a circular motion like a spiral or a spring, if you will.
Right. That's right.
Because you cross over the same places, but you see them differently and experience them differently.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So, so we might encounter a scripture on one level, but then when we talk to you, we encounter it on a different level. And but this is really helpful. I have a group of folks that I meet with in the community at McDonald's, just a bunch of old retirees. And it's been a year, and none of them are coming to church, and I was feeling really discouraged. So this is helpful because I kept thinking I'm not using the right words. I'm not. that obviously there's something lacking as opposed to just ongoing presence.
Yeah. I one of the things that Tim and I have found is exactly that. It can be very frustrating, and you can feel like, that I'm inadequate in some way, or there's something else that I should be doing, when it's really just that constancy of presence. So I was blown away. We have a group of atheists and self-described atheists and self-described humanists that I meet with on Thursday mornings for breakfast. And anytime I would, be anywhere near spiritual, they would get really nervous and get angry. And, even if I didn't even say the name Jesus, and so, I really kind of stay away from that subject altogether. And I'm just present with them. We just have breakfast. We just laugh. We go to D.C. and ride around on the Segway tour and, whatever they want to do. And I've been doing this for 5 years, and this year I said, you know what, I'm tired of doing this. I don't think this is going anywhere. And 2 weeks ago on a Sunday night, they were having a potluck supper. Actually, it was a progressive dinner out on the docks, and I was along with them. And there was a new person there, and they asked me about our church. And one of the other ladies that has always been very I don't want to hear anything, came over to sit down at that picnic table to listen to what I would say. It just blew me away. 5 years. So, I think that we think it should be easy, but it really wasn't easy for Jesus either. We have to wait until people are actually people of peace, and sometimes that takes a long time with people because they have such negative, whatever, or they just don't really, they've never had a life pattern of being involved spiritually in any depth. And so how are they supposed to catch an image of that unless they see it in someone else that can, sort of just be there present, and they can watch how you do things and what you say and what you spend your time on. So I think you're doing a really good work, Teresa, if you've been hanging out with them.
Well, thank you. It's not an easy task.
No, it's not. So, but this idea of the circle, this long relationship, and like you said, Teresa, it's like you do circle after circle after circle after circle, and it is a spiral. It's like we really call it like a slinky, that you're constantly processing around. So John Wesley called our salvation experience the way of salvation, rather than there was a moment, but there's also the sense that we're working out our salvation. So even when we are saved and experience that wholeness that God has for us, we are constantly still learning, and that's what I love about the circle image, is it reminds us that it's a continuous, that we're continuously breaking through and hearing God anew.